Hey there, if you are trying to learn, improve, or perfect a foreign language, this video is for you. So grab something to drink, a snack, because in this video, we'll be covering the mindset around language learning. Then I'll be sharing some general tips and some things to consider, which will help you to maximize your language learning, as well as to help you enjoy it more. Then I'll be sharing with you some language learning activities, which you can take what you like and leave what you don't want, because there may be some language learning activities that you may want to adopt for your own language learning. Then last but not least, we'll be creating a language learning plan with 3 different intensities: light, medium, and intense. So now we're going to talk about mindset. The first thing I want to say is that it is okay and it's important to make mistakes when you are learning a language. And I believe that making mistakes and getting feedback can really help you to perfect that language faster. So my advice would be to embrace mistakes. Along with that, I want to say it's okay not to be perfect, and I think it's even okay to not want to be perfect in your foreign language. And do you know the saying, practice makes perfect? Well, I want to change that and say practice makes progress, because I believe it's the progress that we should be striving for to get better and better. And I believe that striving for perfection can just be a source of anxiety, frustration, and unnecessary stress. Which leads me to an inspirational quote. Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. This quote has been attributed to Bill Gates. And I want to share this because I know when we learn a language, we want everything to happen so fast. And sometimes when we learn a language for a few months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and we are unsatisfied with the results, it's really important to have that long-term vision. Because remember, language learning is a marathon. And it's also okay to have seasons of different intensities. So there may be seasons in your life where you are studying really hard, and some seasons where maybe you've never really practiced your target language. And that's okay. But what I think is really important is to define your why, your reason for learning the language, because I believe that is really what's going to push you and help keep you motivated to continue learning that language. Now let's talk about some general tips and things to consider when you are learning a language. First of all, there are different approaches to learning and teaching a language. For me, as you know, I am not really into studying grammar or studying words or reading the dictionary or memorizing grammar. That's not my approach in learning a language, and that's not my approach in teaching a language, because as you know, I am an English coach, and I also speak English as my first language, French as my second, Spanish as my third, and Ukrainian as my fourth. Ukrainian being at a very basic level. I really believe that the language learning approach should be more natural, more organic, just like we were when we were children and we were learning our first language. We didn't study grammar books, but we had a lot of language input. We were immersed in the language. But please note that it is not necessary to be immersed in a language and to live abroad to learn a language. And as we started to understand the language, we spoke, and then our parents would give us feedback. Oh, no, it's not said like this, it's said like that. And through repetition and correction, we were able to learn our first language. So that's my approach to learning a foreign language as well. However, it does look a little bit different because we are no longer 3 years old. Another philosophy that I have is that it's important for us to do things that we love when we are learning a language. For example, if you like music, listen to music. If you hate reading, maybe reading's not going to be your primary way of learning a language. So do activities that you love while immersing yourself in the language, even though you may not be living in the language. And I mean living in a language as in living in a country where that language is spoken. Another thing that I think is important to consider that a lot of people may not realize is that there's different kinds of learning. For example, an Italian polyglot that I follow, you may know him. His name is Luca Lampariello. He shares in this video all about passive, active, and proactive learning, which is something that I think language learners need to know about in order to really maximize their learning and to really accelerate the speed at which they learn a language. So I'll link his video down below, but in a nutshell, there's passive learning, which is a lot less effective than proactive learning. Proactive learning is a way to really maximize your learning. And as Luca says, it's a way to really skyrocket your language learning. So for example, Luca took listening activities, speaking activities, and writing activities and classified the approach and activities into these 3 categories. So for example, if you're listening to music or podcasts while doing dishes, kind of listening, sometimes not, that would be more passive. Where if it's active listening, you're actively listening to the words, trying to understand them, and just just really being intentional about listening to the words and the sentences and the phrases and whatnot in order to learn more and to capture the language. Where the proactive approach would be listening to the music, but following it with a written transcript so you're able to see the words, listen to how it's being pronounced. You probably have a notebook beside you and you're taking notes of the different sentences or phrases that you're hearing and using this for future study, or just being able to try to incorporate these phrases and words later into different conversation that you're going to be having, or into different future conversations. Or maybe you're even mimicking what you're hearing. Maybe when you hear different phrases or sentences on the radio or on a podcast, you are repeating it back, trying to mimic the speaker in their ways of speaking, trying to imitate their exact pronunciation and speech patterns. Or maybe as you're listening, whether it be a book, podcast, or song, you're trying to transcribe the song, so write it down. So this really works on your listening, understanding, and then writing. So you might want to listen to something really slow while you're doing it, or just write down what you can understand and what you can really catch and hear. So as you can see, the proactive approach takes a lot more energy and time, but it is a lot more effective. Then Luca talks about speaking. In passive learning or passive studying, you are basically just comfortable in the way that you are communicating. You're using words and phrases that you already know. You aren't really looking for feedback. You're not asking for feedback from other people, and you're not really analyzing what other people are saying. You're kind of just doing the minimum, and you are okay with where you're at and what you're doing. You're just really okay with the way you speak. Whereas active learning and studying in regards to speaking would really be to communicate and speak in a way that you are analyzing what you want to say so that you can continue to improve your foreign language. You are really pushing the limits of what you know, because in the passive approach, you're basically saying what you already know is correct or what you're comfortable with. Where you are in the active practice of the language, you are unsure if what you're saying is correct, but you're saying it because you want to get feedback from people, whether it be other people that are going to correct your foreign language, so going to correct your English, or you're with a tutor and you're like, I don't really know if this is said the correct way, but I'm going to say it because I want to know, is it right or is it wrong? So you're really like playing, testing the limits, trying to refine your foreign language. And you're trying to identify the holes in your knowledge, like what are the specific phrases, expressions, or ways of speaking that you are not comfortable with or that you don't really know it's correct. You're trying to actively make mistakes to learn. Are you trying to actively analyze and get feedback in order to really get better? And then proactive, some of the examples that Luca gives, because all of these examples are from him, he talks about getting into Toastmasters or public speaking, really pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, really out of your comfort zone. Possibly creating a presentation or a text to present to your tutor or your language coach so that they can identify gaps in your knowledge and they can give you feedback on the different mistakes that you've made. So as you can see, proactive's a lot more intense. Now we're going to talk about writing. Luca talks about the passive approach being basically like writing emails, texts, maybe writing in your journal, just kind of day-to-day writing where you're not really looking for feedback. You're just using it to get through your day. Where the active approach in your writing, just like in the other categories, your aim is really to improve, to get out of your comfort zone, to really push your limits, and to also possibly ask for feedback, whether it be writing a short text or whatnot, and asking your tutor or coach to review it and give you feedback on mistakes and how to improve it so that you can build upon that knowledge in the future. Then Luca gives a proactive version of this, and this would be to write a text or just write something for your tutor, get them to correct it, look at all the mistakes, rewrite it, get them to correct it again until it is perfect, and then do another write-up and then get it corrected, fix it, recorrect it, fix it, recorrect it until it's perfect. So again, this will give you an idea to help you categorize what kind of activities you want to be doing in your language learning journey. As we know, the proactive approach is the best. However, for sustainability, not everyone has all that energy and that motivation to do this all the time. So you're going to have to find a balance that works for you. For me, I think it's important to have proactive activities every once in a while, but then also try to get the majority of your exercises being more active, and then including passive activities sprinkled throughout your week. week. So now I'm going to give you some ideas of different language learning activities in order to study or improve your target language. And if you have any activities that you prefer when you are learning a language, feel free to mention it down in the comments. It will help me to see what kind of activities you prefer when you're learning a language, and it will help give others some ideas. So here are some activities. Feel free to take the ones you like and leave the ones you don't want. So Steve Kaufman actually has this very interesting technique that I thought I'd share. So he recommends listening to something fast. So I think that's at a normal pace. And then after re-listening to a video or a song or a podcast slowly. And I believe he even recommends listening to the same videos and podcasts over and over. I know that a lot of other polyglots, so people who speak multiple languages, do recommend re-listening to the same content over and over. Because maybe the first time that you listen to something, you may understand a certain percentage of it, and then you'll understand more and more. And then as we listen to it and almost perfect all of our understanding, we're able to take notes of different things that we may not have noticed the first time we listened to it. Maybe it's the choice of prepositions. Maybe it is the way something's pronounced, or maybe it's just different vocabulary words that you're like, hey, I never knew this word can be used this way. And another thing you can do while you are listening to different videos is to add subtitles. But it really depends on what your goal and focus is, because I know that subtitles can be really useful because they help you to really see each word, how it's spelled. So it helps with spelling, and it also can help you to see things that you may not have noticed while you were listening. I know some people say that you shouldn't use subtitles if you already understand what's being said, but sometimes I do believe that there is a place for subtitles even if you do understand everything anyways, because you can see little words and prepositions that you may not have noticed while just listening to it. However, if you are trying to develop your ear and your comprehension, then while taking the subtitles off might be more beneficial to you. So it's important for you to check out what your goals are and to align the activities with your goals. So a piece of advice that I think is so important, because I think it will just up level your language learning, and that is to find ways to produce the language. And when I'm talking about that, I mean writing or speaking. When you really have to produce the writing, you have to produce the words. This is because this really helps you to identify different holes or gaps in your knowledge. Because for example, if you're reading a book or if you're listening to music, you might understand it and you're like, oh, I feel confident. But once you start producing and you start speaking, that's when you realize, hey, I actually don't know that word. Hey, I actually don't know how to use this expression. So this really helps you to identify holes and gaps in your knowledge so that you know what to work on in order to improve your target language. So whether that means going to different conversational groups or finding a conversational language partner or meeting up with a tutor or even writing short little texts for your language tutor. These are just really great ways to practice and be intentional in your language learning. And we also have listening to music. Listening to music is one of my favorite ways to learn a language. I personally have done this when I was learning Spanish and also as I am learning and starting Ukrainian. And if using music is one of your favorite ways to learn and improve a language, some of the ways you can step it up is to print out the lyrics and to look at the lyrics, or to start writing out the lyrics as you're listening. So this really helps you to reinforce and to really accelerate the pace that you're learning the language. And if you like reading, reading is a really great way to improve your target language, to build vocabulary, as well as just seeing different expressions and how different words go together. And if you like reading, you can also match it up with an audiobook. So as I've mentioned, I love Audible. I have a link in the description down below, which will give you your first month, which is your first book free. So you can have the book that you're reading, read it like you think it's pronounced, and then you can listen to the audiobook, see how it's pronounced, repeat after the audiobook, pause and play, and to really learn how to not only read visually, but then also pronounce what you're reading properly. And it's also a great way to really verify your pronunciation. Again, if you like watching Netflix or movies, you can watch movies or shows with or without subtitles, depending on what your current goals are in your target language. And if you want to develop your listening ear to see if you understand, you can listen to different videos or podcasts or even Audible books. Write and transcribe what you've heard, and this will help you to see, did you understand what was said? Are there missing words or wrong prepositions? Because prepositions sometimes are tricky in another language. Is your spelling correct? And if you have the book, you can definitely just correct yourself. So you have the audiobook that reads to you, you write, pause, slow it down, do what you need, write it down, and then correct with the actual book. So it's a fun way to just test yourself. And if you're wanting to work on your pronunciation or your speaking, practice and have conversations with people, whether it be at a language exchange group in your city, with a language partner, or even your tutor. I've talked about language partners in another video, so if you're curious about how to find someone to speak English with, feel free to check out my description down below, because I will link the video down below. But when you're conversing and practicing in your target language, so maybe it's English, if you want to step it up and to be a little more intense and to maximize your learning, you can ask your language partner or tutor for feedback on different mistakes that you've made. Again, this could be a little bit touchy with language partners because not everyone knows what to look for, and maybe your language partner is a little bit shy in correcting you, or they just may not speak English as your first language. But if you have someone that can correct you, even if it is like a language coach or tutor, these are really great ways to get feedback on your speaking, whether it be pronunciation or just the way that you speak if you make English mistakes or mistakes in whatever language that you are learning. Another helpful way to improve your pronunciation and speaking, I've hinted to it previously in this video, and that is shadowing. Repeating after a native speaker is trying to imitate and mimic what they're saying. So this could be when you're listening to the radio, when you're listening to a podcast, maybe TV shows, when you hear expressions and repeating exactly as they say it. Also, this is why I have my repeat after me videos where I repeat a sentence separately and then together so that you can see different patterns, different speech patterns, how the intonation is in a sentence. So feel free to check out those videos also down below. And if you want to even take it to the next level, you can also record yourself when you are shadowing a native speaker, because sometimes when we're speaking we don't hear our accent. But I know for myself, when I'm speaking French and I listen back to my message, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have such a strong accent. So sometimes listening to native speakers, repeating, and then listening to the recording can help give you feedback on possible pronunciation mistakes that you may be making. But in the end, what is important is that you do what is right for you, what you like, and to find a balance between the activities that you like and also activities that kind of push your knowledge to the next level and challenge you. Next, I'm going to be talking about language learning expectations. What does it look like to start learning a language all the way to the end? So I'm speaking from personal experience and also from what I've read, but I find that when you first learn a language, I don't know, at least for me, because this is fairly recent for me, at the very beginning, it feels like there's no progress, and it can be really frustrating because it's just hard to try to surround yourself in the language and understand it. So that can be really discouraging. But I feel like once people start being able to speak a little bit in the language, it kind of accelerates in the learning process, and then you hit kind of an intermediate plateau. And I feel like at this moment, when you're at that intermediate plateau, it's very discouraging because I feel like at this intermediate plateau, it is really slow. There's progress, but it doesn't feel like it, which I feel like this is a good time to start reading books, coupling it with audiobooks and stuff like that. But then I feel like it starts picking up again, and then just before you start perfecting the language, it's really, really slow at the end, because I think it's almost impossible to be perfect in a foreign language, but it starts slowing down again. So that's something that I personally expect for my fourth language, because that's what I've seen in my previous languages. Also, if you follow Steve Kaufman and you've seen his advice on steps to learning a language, you'll see that his steps are really: one, get a lot of input. Listen to the language, listen to the music, listen to the radio, try to read or whatever, just get a lot of exposure. And this will allow your brain to be able to start to identify different words and see different language patterns and how things go together. Your brain starts to, I guess, assimilate the language. And then two, he talks about kind of like occasionally reviewing some of the things that you've seen and heard. And then after a lot of input, then you can start speaking. And then once you're able to understand enough and to start speaking, it starts to get a lot more fun because you have more flexibility on the kind of activities you can do, different books you can read, resources and whatnot that you can use. And I think that's why it's pretty slow at the beginning, because I feel like when you learn a language, especially if it's your first exposure, it's like Chinese. We have the expression, it's like Chinese to me. It's just so foreign. It's like, I don't even know, it all sounds like blah, 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 blah. So you'll be able to identify, oh, that's a word, that's a verb, that's a subject, and you start to be able to make connections. So after that input, then you're going to start be able to understand, start speaking. Yeah, that's pretty much how I'd summarize what it would look like and what to expect. Again, this is just my personal opinion, but I've been there and done that. But if you have learned other languages, feel free to share what your expectation would be as well, because I am open and curious about that as well. Next, let's make a plan so that we can learn, improve, and perfect our foreign languages. So if you've seen my other videos, you know that I believe it is better to spend 10 to 15 minutes a day in a language each day, rather than spending, 3 or 4 hours one day per week. So I really want to mention that because I think that is really important, that there is that consistent daily or almost daily exposure to the language that you are learning. That being said, I'm going to share with you a light, medium, and intense plan, which I think I'm personally going to be following to improve my third and fourth languages, because I haven't been practicing for a while, which I think it's important to be intentional if we want to learn or improve a language. So for the light language learning plan, I would say to spend 10 to 15 minutes a day in the language or the languages that you're learning. Medium, I would say spend 30 minutes per day in the language, and intense, I would say over 60 minutes per day. In regards to the passive learning activities, active learning activities, and proactive learning activities, I would say to choose whatever works for you. But I know for me, I want to focus more on activities that work on the active study of a language, and then maybe once or twice a week I will do some proactive learning and studying. And of course, I'll sprinkle some passive learning all throughout my day. And I know for me, when I'm learning a language, it's important for me to have a go-to resource. For me, my go-to resource is a link. So I'll actually put the reference link in the description for those who are interested in downloading this app. So it's a phone app. And when you're deciding whether you want to do the light, medium, or intense, or which kind of activities you want to do, I would like to highly suggest that you try to do it in a way that is sustainable, in a way that you will not become burnt out. Because I know sometimes it's easy to I want to go intense, I want to learn a lot, but then after we kind of fizzle out and we burn out, we aren't able to stay consistent. So looking at this, if you ask yourself, what can I stay consistent with? Because remember, we overestimate what we can do in a year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. If you're wanting to check out some other language learning tips, feel free to click this playlist right here. And if you are trying to perfect your English and you make some English mistakes, you can test your knowledge right here where I present some common English mistakes. Anyways, take care and I'll see you in another video. Bye!